I'm giving my shout out to Kevin. Please register for his events. I've been around long enough to remember when Kevin started with us, and he has done such an amazing job leading YPN, putting together events, and not just putting together events locally, but also making sure we have a global reach, going as far as Dubai and hosting the Global Congress. So, if you don't know Kevin or if you haven't been to the events, I strongly encourage you all to go out, get to know Kevin, learn more about all the amazing things he's doing with YPN, along with the current YPN president, Simo, and the incoming Darnell. But now that we've gotten, kind of that intro plug, let me jump into it. So this class was actually based on a conversation with Kevin, which for me is very second nature because to give you all a little bit of my background and, why am I qualified to talk to you all about foreclosures, distressed sales, and whatnot. I was actually have a master's in accounting that I got in 2003. I went to law school and graduated in 2007, and I got the best accounting exercise I could ever get. I had $200,000 in debt and no job because everybody was pretty much unemployed, and the only work was in the foreclosure world. So back in those days when you graduated, everybody that I know either ended up working for a bank or ended up defending people in foreclosure. And, it's kind of weird now being 43 years old, having, 15 years of experience. And I hear people talk about 2008 like it was, the Stone Age, and they have no idea about everything that happened and how foreclosures work because, it was a lot different. And I have a really interesting slide in here where I will show you all. I will show you all, the difference in the number of foreclosures today versus what they were, for example, in 2014. So my story in 30 seconds was I became an attorney. I actually ended up working, helping investors purchase properties at foreclosure auctions. Eventually, I started working for a small local fund. We bought a lot of properties. I actually ended up doing a lot of litigation, which created case law. For example, there was a very famous case that I had, which was a property worth $600,000 that an investor bought for 1,600. The banks litigated us on that for 2 years. And by the way, no, those scenarios, I wish I could replicate them often. They don't happen. It was a very unique situation. But we did a lot of litigation also with associations and their assessments. And as a result of that, that's actually how I ended up getting my real estate license. We ended up buying about 3,000 homes for a large Wall Street client. And a lot of times I ended up having to do a lot of the underwriting. That's how I got my license. And then that kind of wrapped up in 2016 after we bought those 3,000 homes, started doing more traditional real estate. And in 2020, I assembled a team of agents, which is how I become a broker. And I got my license. And that's, kind of why the gambit of my experience is everything from, putting deals together to title to closings and everything in between. So that's my little story. But today, my main goal is to provide you at least a foundation. So when you are dealing with an individual and you either learn of a property in foreclosure or you learn of an individual that you think may be in distress or somebody talks to you about a short sale, that you understand those terms and understand the world and really understand the conversations that you need to be having. The most important thing I understand for all of us is at the end of the day, you're all brokers. You're all trying to put deals together. You're all out there trying to do sales. What I'm trying to do is give you that foundation because a lot of times people will have the conversation and they will say, well, perfect example. The buyer comes to you, well, I want to buy a foreclosure. And they don't exactly understand what that entails. Or somebody is coming to you to sell and you need to really understand how to work with that individual. So with that being said, I want to jump right into it. So first, let's lay a little foundation and let's talk about some of the key terms that I want you all to understand. And this is important when you're dealing with someone. First of all, let's talk about a distressed seller, right? A distressed seller will be anybody that is having some sort of financial hardship. And, as we'll talk about in a little bit, that financial hardship can come in many ways. Maybe they missed a payment. Maybe they're actually having hardship in some other aspect of their life. So distress, remember, can come in a lot of different shapes and fashions. And you really need to understand that when you're dealing with these individuals. The second thing is the term default. And the reason this is important is default is usually a term that is going to be within any agreement. Think of, for example, your note or your mortgage that your client may have on their property. And it's important to understand, are they in default? Because you need to understand just where in the process this individual is. Maybe this individual only had a bad month. Did they have a bad month or did they have a bad year? And what exactly is it that triggered that default? Because the perfect example is, and this is the one that I see all the time, is we'll have somebody send us a property. Oh, I saw it on Zillow. It says foreclosure. Well, what does that mean? What led to the actual default? The next thing is foreclosure itself. A lot of people will throw around the word foreclosure and they don't understand exactly what that means. Understand that for there to be a foreclosure, foreclosure is a legal process where an action is filed in court in order for a lien holder to reclaim an interest in a property or to foreclose on that interest, right? So if there's a foreclosure, there is a pending court action. And this is important because a lot of times people will talk to somebody and they'll be like, "Oh, he's in foreclosure." He might not be. He might actually just be in default. And he might have defaulted. He may have missed a payment. He may not have put insurance on his property, but the bank has not instituted foreclosure. And a little bit later on in this presentation, I'll show you the process for a foreclosure because it's important for you to understand how long have we been at this? How bad is the issue, right? So let's say we weren't talking about foreclosure. Let's do this another way, right? Let's say we were talking about our health, right? You can, for example, you can look at me right now and say, oh, well, he looks pretty healthy, right? But it's not really until we do a full diagnosis that we could know exactly how, my health is. And it's the same thing when you're dealing with a lot of these individuals that may have issues. And the last term is short sale. So a short sale is nothing more than an individual owes money on a property and they owe more on all the debts on the property than what it's worth. So they are asking all their lien holders, can we pay you less than what you are owed in order for us, the seller, to be able to sell? So understand that, these are different terms and you need to understand what is going on when you are dealing with these individuals. Um, First things first, right? When you go out and you're dealing with someone and you're trying to figure out are they in distress or not, um, I've seen 3,000. At this point, I've probably done like 4,000 properties that we either bought from foreclosure, we bought at auction, we bought through different mechanisms, and understand that when you're talking to these individuals and you're touring the properties, look for the red flags, right? What are red flags of distress? Number one, deferred maintenance. You look at the property, like for example, one time I walked a property in foreclosure. They had been doing such a poor job with the AC and the insulation. All the hi-hats in the house from the expansion from moisture had exploded. All the hi-hats were hanging around all over the house. Easy one is obviously overgrown landscaping. You may even see the utilities shut off. There's actually a poor homeowner near me. He hasn't had water in his house. He's been in foreclosure for like a year and a half, and you could see it. Missing association payments. Other things too that are red flags that you'll see with the owner that will give you an indication that they may have some form of distress is you'll start to see quick claim deeds. So when you go on the property appraiser, I don't know if a lot of you do this, but when you go to the property appraiser and you scroll down, and it'll usually show you the deed of the owners. When you look at those, sometimes you'll see a bunch of transfers for $100. Usually that's because people that are having financial situations start thinking, oh, well, I'm going to transfer the property to my cousin or I'm going to transfer it. All right. And by the way, keep in mind that's something, even if there's not distress, just keep it in mind if you're doing a routine deal from a title perspective. When so many transfers happen for no money, they tend to create title issues. Another red flag is you'll start to see these individuals, they'll have a lot of like private loans. So they're getting private lending, and all of a sudden you start to find out from them, well, I took out a loan with this guy, I took out a loan with this lender. That's a red flag. Unfinished work. So they started work on the property and now they're telling you about, well, they haven't finished it and you see an unfinished room. Another easy one, property taxes. You'll see, 3 years of taxes are unpaid. And really, the last one is their stories don't make sense. So they start telling you certain things and they just don't add up. A lot of times it's with regards to their quality of life. So they start, saying things that just kind of makes no sense. Um, but that being said, I want you all to understand there's a couple of important distinctions in here that we all need to understand, which is number one, a foreclosure doesn't mean that there is a short sale. All right. So why is this important? Because a lot of times people will say, well, this individual is in foreclosure. He's going to need to do a short sale. Remember, a short sale is going to be a situation where the individual owes more money on all their debts on the property than what they own. Sometimes you will see a foreclosure. The individual may be in foreclosure, but to give you an easy example, the property is worth $1 million, but they only owe $300,000. So they have equity there. And we need to understand that because if they have equity, right, that's the type of individual that you want to have a conversation with and you want to say, listen, you owe $300,000. Your property's worth $1 million. You can walk away with $700,000 and you can restart your life and you can have that conversation. But maybe they are a short sale situation and they owe more than what it's worth. It's important because you need to diagnose these things. And sometimes people, I've seen them where they will see a property and it'll be in foreclosure and they'll make the assumption that this individual is just going to give the property away because they owe more than what it's worth or they owe exactly what it's worth and they're just going to walk away. Um, Another distinction that I want to make is just because somebody is in distress or they're in foreclosure doesn't mean they may have like your typical distress. Because, for example, some of these properties, and this is why I personally have always had an issue with the fact that Zillow labels properties with foreclosure because that's one of the main sites, and homeowners will send that to me. And we've had this conversation, with some of these websites that they show foreclosure on it, but it doesn't really tell you what is going on there. You have to do an additional diagnosis. So here is, for example, a common issue that I see is there's a lot of individuals who may end up in foreclosure, for example, because their loan got to the end and they just weren't able to refinance in time. So they actually have equity, they have good credit, they were under an understanding that the lender was going to renew their loan and they didn't. So they may not be looking to sell immediately. They're probably just looking to refinance. And you need to have the right conversation with that seller or that individual or that property owner because you may be coming as a realtor and you're seeing their property in foreclosure and you're giving them advice on selling when maybe what they need is just a lender and you can really work on that relationship. Um, the last one is a foreclosure doesn't mean that the property is an REO or the bank owns it. I have a slide later on where I show this a little bit more easier for you to see visually, but understand that Florida is a lien state. And what that means by a lien state is in Florida, the owner owns their property and any debts or any mortgages or any liens, they all become liens against their property and those are encumbrances to their title, but they own it. So even though they are in foreclosure, while they are in foreclosure, they still own their property. That's why, for example, going to the point of distress or where are they or do they need to do a short sale? Up until the end of the process, they own it. The bank does not own it, and the bank cannot just sell it for them. Because a lot of times your clients or whichever side, whether you're representing a buyer trying to buy a property from somebody in foreclosure or you're representing that individual, sometimes they'll say, "Oh, the bank is going to take the property away, or the bank already has it." The bank does not own that property until a foreclosure sale occurs. Um, Going on. what drives distress, right? Which is what we are talking about. Understand that you need to ask these questions because you need to understand it. It could be personal issues. They lose their income. They have a job loss. They're going through a divorce, which led to financial issues. They may have had an illness. All right. The second most common thing is you'll see property issues, right? They're just unable to maintain it. You'll tend to see that a lot with older individuals that have a house that's too big and it becomes difficult for them to maintain it. It could be more of a multifamily commercial asset, and they're just not generating enough money and they have negative cash flow to make it happen. Or a very frequent one that you'll see is there are damages to the property. In other words, they may have, for example, we did a lot of transactions recently on the West Coast. There were a lot of individuals that experienced damages during the hurricane, and they just needed to sell because they couldn't do it. And some of them, unfortunately, ended up also in foreclosure. Could also be just liens and debts against the property. They can't pay the property taxes anymore. They may have personal tax liens that are affecting them and their business. The association, they could owe a contractor more money. And the last one could just be business issues. A lot of times you'll see individuals that they took credit lines against their house. They went to go do other businesses, and now their business didn't do well, and now it affected, their housing situation. Um, Moving on, once you kind of understand distress, you also need to understand that when you're talking to these individuals, you need to understand what actually triggered a default for them. In other words, they had an agreement with a lender typically, and now, by the way, I'm looking at the questions, and at the end, I'll go back to the top and I'll try to answer some of these questions. So understand when it comes to the default, we want to address and understand what led to the default, because the most common scenario is we always jump to the conclusion, well, they missed a payment, right? And if they missed a payment, then what we need to find out is, did they miss one payment? Have they missed several? Are they able to reinstate, right? Because sometimes if it's they've only missed two or three payments, they can reach out to the lender. The lender says, pay this amount, you can come in. Or have they not paid for 3 years and the lender now is at the point where they're saying you're not going to be able to reinstate. All right. And that's important because if they miss the payment, usually the next thing that will happen is 90 days later, they'll issue a default. Like I mentioned earlier, it could be a balloon payment. Maybe it's just a situation where, and you'll see this a lot with, for example, individuals who are fixing and flipping properties. A lot of those loans will say, we'll give you an interest only loan, but it's only for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, you have to pay the full amount of the amount owed. So let's say they took out a loan for $500,000 and they had 10% interest only. They have 2 years to pay back the 500K and they'll only pay interest. You'll have the insurance issues. Typically, that'll be because they didn't pay their insurance, and now let's say they had a $5,000 insurance bill. They didn't renew it on time or provide proof to their lender. All of a sudden, their lender puts a $15,000 forced place insurance, and now they may be in default with their lender because they have this dispute over insurance. And believe it or not, I see this one pretty frequently with individuals, especially the ones that don't escrow. Um, or there may be some borrower dispute where, like, for example, two people, one person was on the loan, the other one wasn't. They move out, one stops paying, the other one's trying to pay, or the other one's not paying their share. And you have these situations where now the lender finds them in default because of all the different scenarios. So here's where I'm going to give you my first practice tip. And this is why I want to educate everyone on, the entire world around foreclosures, because take it from someone who back in 2010, what is that? I guess somebody can annotate it. Um, I don't know how to stop that, Kevin, by the way. They, when you are meeting with these individuals, and the reason I'm trying to give you a base is you want to ask a lot of questions. You want to assume. Unfortunately, too many times I've had conversations where I'm helping agents and we're trying to help their client and figure out, and I'll hear them say something to a seller like, "Well, you need to sell." And the reality is, you need to understand what's going on with them so you can give them proper advice because maybe they don't need to sell, or maybe they have options. And we need to understand. And most importantly, and you need to be very empathetic. I unfortunately in my career, from like 2009 to 2011, you know, half of Miami was probably in foreclosure. I would sit with like four families a day, and unfortunately, I had a lot of people crying in my office. And I remember I would usually, have a dialogue with them, and a lot of them stayed my clients to this day, mainly because, I had conversations, and whereas everybody in the world was lying to them and telling them like, you can save your home, you're going to get it. I was asking them about their goals, what caused them to get here, what the issue was, and what we can find to be the best path forward. So, and this is why I say, like, at this point, you're going to be a financial consultant and you're also going to be a therapist. Um, Somebody's losing, especially if it's their home. Think about it. They couldn't pay their bills, most likely, and now they have to move. They don't need a realtor telling them, you gotta go, Like you need to be able to have that dialogue and kind of walk them through it and show them what the world looks like. And that's why you have to understand how this process works out. So in the world of chaos that they have of, losing their property, you can be that comfort of, well, you know what? At least, Jonathan was able to kind of tell me how it was going to play out and give me comfort. Like even something as simple, what I just explained to everyone right now, which is that when you're in foreclosure, the bank doesn't own it. I can't tell you how many homeowners are in foreclosure and they think that the bank is going to show up any day and remove them from the property. Um, so when you're having those conversations, here's trying to remove that annotation thing. Um, Here's a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind that are very important when you're having conversations with individuals that are in dispute. Number one, a quick resolution is always one of the best things that they can do. A lot of times, what they don't understand is when they are in default, what ends up happening is it accelerates a bunch of issues. The interest rates get higher. The interest rate on the loan can go as high as 18%, even higher if it's commercial, right? They have um they have attorney's fees accumulating. They have a bunch of they can have collection fees. And what ends up happening is, let's take that example of somebody that has a $300,000 loan and it's worth 1 million. If they leave it in distress, their equity can get eaten very long, and you need to have the conversation with them. Today, if you sold, you'd have $700,000. But if you wait 2 years, you may have $500,000. So I understand, Mr. Seller, that your property is worth, I believe is worth 1 million if we sold it today in today's market. But you want to hold out for 1,050,000, which may not happen for another year or two. You're going to lose $150,000 on that bet, and they need to understand it. And usually, individuals that are savvy understand that you don't want to go up against lenders. They're always going to win. The majority of times, it's trust me. I have been on thousands of cases. Your best thing is to work out a resolution that is beneficial to both parties. Next thing is always, like, even in that example, get them focused on future ownership and understanding that the quicker they resolve this, the quicker their credit repairs, the quicker they can start saving again, and the quicker they can do it. And these things compound, and they can do it. I'll never forget. There was an individual in 2011. He met with me. He was a banker. I can never forget him because he was the father of a gentleman I went to high school with. He had way too much debt. There was no way he was going to save it all, but he really wanted to save it all. And he had this savior complex. And I told him, listen, man, there's no way out. Declare bankruptcy. You're going to spend 4 years throwing good money away, and you're never going to get out of this. He didn't do it. And finally, 7 years later, he declared bankruptcy. I'll never forget because I saw him, one day. I happened to run into him by chance, and he pulled me aside randomly. His son was having an event, and I happened to be there, and he was like, one of my biggest regrets in life was not listening to you. He's like, in 2011, you were so honest with me. He's like, and then I went and met with one of these guys who promised me the world that I was going to be able to save it all. He's like, you were the only one. Because, by the way, I didn't even do bankruptcy. So it wasn't in my best interest, right, to refer my client to somebody else who did bankruptcy. But the reality is, we're always here to serve the clients. And the reason I firmly believe and I teach everyone on how to understand this world and how to talk to these individuals is you want to have a client for life. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, if you're just looking to take their property, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that, have all sorts of online courses to teach you, different tactics. I don't believe in that world. I believe you sit with someone and you try to figure out, what's best for them. And I'll never forget that because he's a perfect example of this future ownership scenario. Obviously, the next one is realistic planning. And the reason I bring that up is you also need to understand as much as I'm trying to educate you all, even with all my experience to this day, I'll get brought in, to consult with an individual who has a situation and they they're just not accepting reality. They think they're going to beat the bank. They think they're going to pull a fast one on everyone. They think their property is going to double in value in the next year. And you need to be able to recognize these individuals because I can't tell you, there's so many times at this point I'm a firm believer there's a reason why AI has not taken over real estate, okay? And there's a firm reason why we are still so crucial to the process. This entire process of selling or buying a home has so many individuals involved. There's so much emotion that it's very difficult to just make it into an automated process. That's why people fail time and time again. And this is one of the perfect examples because at this point, with so many thousands of situations that I've been in, I can talk to an individual and I'll tell a realtor, listen, this guy's being unreasonable and he's never going to sell. I can just tell, by the way he's talking and the way he's acting. And I'll watch a realtor spend 18 months going around with this individual trying to help them. And they have no intention of selling, but of course, they want to go through the motions because they're trying to buy time with their lenders. Um, Last piece of the puzzle is if you all really want to focus on helping and working with individuals that are in distress, you need to get referral partners. You need referral partners because you need people that you can immediately bring in to work on these issues. You're not going to be able to do this yourself. So you may need you'll need different types of attorneys. You'll need, foreclosure defense attorneys, if they are in foreclosure defense. I'm sorry, if they are in foreclosure, so they can help them defend and at least advise them and walk them through the process. If it's a commercial situation, you may need a commercial litigation attorney. You'll need a bankruptcy attorney because these individuals are going to have a bunch of questions, and sometimes they may say, "Well, I'm just going to declare bankruptcy." Well, here's another thing about bankruptcy, and some people don't realize this. Some people may be losing a property, but if they have equity in all their other properties and they declare bankruptcy, when you declare bankruptcy, especially if it's, a chapter 7, which is like the individual one, they take control of all your assets. So they may be selling other ones. So you may want to just avoid bankruptcy and they're going to need somebody to explain it to them. And you all are not allowed to provide legal advice. So you need to have those people on deck to do it because, and I'm telling you, frankly speaking, because if not, they start calling 5 or 10 other people. And then all of a sudden, you're not the one talking to the client. You may need an insurance litigation attorney, especially if like their damages or distress are coming from, a property damage claim, a hard money lender, who maybe can step in and help them buy time, especially in investment scenarios, or even handymen, right? Handymen that can do quick, cheap repairs where we can get a property that maybe hasn't been maintained for a couple of years, but you can make it at least somewhat acceptable because, the other thing that a lot of these sellers in distress, especially if you're representing the seller, they have a hard time understanding is unfortunately everybody's going to learn about their distress situation and try to use it against them. So the more they can put their property in a position that they can look like, no, no, I have this under control, the more leverage they have because the free market is going to try to use their distress um, against them. All right. So, and I think somebody in there was asking about the foreclosure process. So, I want to show everyone here a little timeline of what it looks like when someone is actually in foreclosure, so you can have an understanding. Understand that like the process from when an individual misses a payment to when a sheriff will show up at their house to remove them could probably be 2 years, most likely. Let's say they run really fast, maybe it'll be like a year to 18 months, but typically you're gonna see it's gonna go over a year, I would say, if I had to be a betting man. So typically the timeline that you will see is the borrower misses a payment, right? And then the next step is going to be the lender is going to issue them a letter of default. And the reason they're going to issue them a letter of default is that's usually required by the mortgages, at least if they're using the standard mortgage that most lenders will have. And the bank will typically wait to the 90-day mark. So they'll wait for like 3 months of missed payments before they start to initiate proceedings. All right. The next step after that will be typically after 30 days of whatever the default or whatever they agreed upon with the borrower, the lawsuit will be filed. And by the way, I'm streamlining this timeline to make it easy, but there's a bunch of sub steps that have to occur in here so you understand of all the steps that need to happen in order for a foreclosure to follow all the court proceedings to get to the end. And once again, ask questions and understand, because if somebody tells you I'm in foreclosure, ask them, well, what has happened? Have you been served? Do you have a case number? You know, have you hired an attorney? Is there a judgment? Understand these things because you want to know in this timeline where they are. So the lawsuit is filed. And by the way, once the lawsuit is filed, they also have to serve the individual, which means, the bank has to send a sheriff to find them and to personally provide them a copy of the documents. Or if they don't find them, then there's an entirely different process for that. Next step will be the lawsuit has been filed. The individual was served, right? So they were made aware. The individual has 20 days to respond. And then typically what will happen is what we generically refer to as litigation will commence. So we'll have litigation commences, and that'll be um, that is when litigation will happen. I need to stop looking at the chat. Every time I look at the chat, I lose my train of thought. And then you'll have what is known as discovery, which is the parties looking at gathering the evidence back and forth. There may be hearings where the parties are trying to move the case along, and then the case will typically end with what is known as summary judgment or trial. And realistically, there are two other options, which is a settlement or a dismissal of the case altogether. But let's say the foreclosure timeline proceeds and the homeowner slash owner is unable to resolve it, it'll typically end in summary judgment or trial. Summary judgment is just that the bank, let's say the bank is the party that wins, the bank would come to the court and say, listen, there's no dispute here, judge. They missed the payment, they haven't paid, they admit they haven't paid, and we're entitled to judgment. Or there may be a trial in the situation where maybe the defendant raised really good arguments and there is a basis for going to trial. Like, for example, we had cases go to trial. Typically, a lot of them were the insurance ones, where the bank put forced place insurance on the owner of the property when they weren't supposed to. And then we ended up in trial fighting over whether that should have actually even have happened. And then once that process is entered, a final judgment will be entered by the court. So the final judgment now is the conclusion. And the judgment is, if if you all watch Law and Order or you like those crime shows, final judgment is the verdict, right? So the final judgment is when the court says this is the ruling of the court, and we enter a judgment in favor. Let's say it was obviously in favor of the bank, and pursuant to that judgment, and there is a standard form that they operate under, that they use for judgment. So they typically read the same, and that form will say the liens that are extinguished, the parties that were subordinate, and the most importantly is it will order a foreclosure sale of the property, and it'll state on what date the sale of the property is to be held in order to obtain, the sale proceeds, which would be used to pay off the lien that was foreclosed upon. Um, and that'll typically happen 30 days after the final judgment. One little tip here, realistically, how most of the foreclosure cases end up being resolved is usually the parties will enter into some sort of agreement. And a lot of times what you'll see is an agreement where the bank will say, listen, we're gonna you'll give us judgment, but we'll give you 90 to 120 to maybe 180 days until the sale happens. So you have time to either pay us off or sell it. Um, and then once the foreclosure sale has occurred, the title will be issued to the buyer or the bank 10 days after the sale happens. And that's because after the sale happens, typically the court will issue a certificate of sale indicating that the sale has occurred and for what amount and to who it was sold, and instructing any parties that want to object to the sale that they have 10 days. And then after those 10 days, the clerk will begin the procedures to issue the certificate of title. And then once that title is issued, that's when title officially passes. Um, title officially passes. Uh, to the new owner. And then there's a lot of little considerations in there. I think somebody was asking about, does the bank automatically get the property? They do not, because when the foreclosure sale is ordered, so based on that judgment that you all see there, the judgment will determine how much the lien holder, right? Typically, a first mortgage is owed. So let's go with that scenario. I've been going about $300,000 on $1 million property. So let's say the property was in foreclosure for a year. So it was $300,000 what was owed when the payments were missed, but now with interest, collection, default, etc., the court may enter a judgment $376,000 is owed to the bank. All right. That final judgment, what ends up happening on the date of the foreclosure auction is the bank is allowed to do what's known as credit bidding. So they basically can bid up to $376,000. And if they bid up to $376,000, they don't have to put any money up for it. Now, if the bank wants to bid anything above at that, then they are going to have to put money in there. So that's important to understand that no, the property is not automatically going to go back to the bank. Where you will typically see that is, let me now reverse it, right? Let's say the bank is owed $1,200,000 and the property is worth $300,000. In that situation, then chances are, since the bank can credit bid up to 1.2 and it's worth 300, there's a very high likelihood that the property is going to revert to the bank. Um, I want to make an important announcement here to educate you all. I want you all to understand that I have just educated you all on the process of what happens when a bank forecloses and that leads to an auction. I want you all to understand that the only, the the clerk of courts, and the majority of them throughout the state use the same platform, it's located on Miami-Dade realforeclose.com. All right. Now there are third-party platforms such as Zome and auctions.com that also do auctions. Guys, give me a second. There's somebody outside my office. Sorry about that, guys. There's somebody making noise outside my office. So there's third-party platforms. So understand that the only platform that the clerk of court has is Miami-Dade Real Foreclose. A lot of individuals will think that like these other platforms, and by the way, there's also like different auctions that can happen, for example, from like bankruptcy proceedings and things of the sort. So keep in mind that there's different platforms. And when it comes to the Miami-Dade Real Foreclose system, which is the one that the court uses, you can sign up for your own free account. I put the link there so you all can do it. Sign up, and it's a great resource because you can see auctions happening in real time. You can kind of learn about them. You can kind of do their training videos versus all these third-party platforms. Unfortunately, I don't track them all because there's so many of them and they have different rules and they can be different systems. So, just keep that in mind. So when you log in, it should look something like this. And I wanted to show you all this to kind of give you an idea. This was one of the accounts that I used to have back in 2015. I bought 890 properties, and back then our average acquisition price for a 3-2 home was like about $220,000. We all know that now in Miami that's around like $700,000. We spent 90 million back then, which probably would have been like half a billion today. Um, and but when you log in, you'll see all of this. And the great thing is, if you click on calendar on the left, you can see all the upcoming properties and you can learn about them. And you'll be able to click on the calendar, and this is kind of what the calendar looks like. And so this I love to show to people. So I always, I try to update it based on the current month. But if you look at October of 2025, notice how typically you'll see Mondays will have the most auctions because that's, when the judges are filling up the calendar, and then throughout the week it starts to go down. But look at January 2014. There would be 227 in a day. All right. There would literally be more in one day that there is in an entire month nowadays. So that's why, and you can see it through the court systems and the court filings. So when people say, oh, there's going to be a wave of foreclosures, or they start, making all of these comments, look at the current data. I urge you all to log in and kind of see. And the reality is, I still have a lot of friends, that are in the foreclosure world, which is where I kind of grew up. And I talk to them all the time. And, I ask them for the pulse. And the reality is, they say the reason you're not seeing as many sales is most people have equity now and they're going to want to work it out. And that's why I'm saying, and I think it's great that so many of you are here today educating yourself and trying to learn this process and how it works and understand, because there's a massive opportunity for you all to pick up listings and when you're talking to these individuals because they want to sell. The huge problem that we had back in 2014 is you could talk to these sellers, they owed more than it was worth, and it was just too much of a nightmare. So the vehicle for buying auctions, if I was an investor, was of buying properties was to go to the auction, because if you tried to go through them directly, you couldn't get anything done. Um, this is an important public service announcement that I want to give right now, is that understand that these auctions are pursuant to court proceedings. All right. You will not have title insurance. You don't have any guarantee, and you need to be extremely careful. At least once a month, I have someone who reaches out to me and they bid at an auction and they did not know what they were bidding on. I've seen people lose as much as $500,000 in an auction because they don't understand what they're bidding on. And the reason is foreclosures are a result of our laws. And I try to make this presentation and educate you all as high level as possible because, for example, somebody invited me to lunch once and I went to lunch with them and they said, could you teach me, foreclosures and auctions, while we're at lunch? And and I was like, this is literally a process that has so many steps, so many moving parts. Like I couldn't even like start to put it together for you because there's a lot of moving parts. But the simplest thing that I want you to understand is based on what I explained, right? In Florida, you are the owner of the property, and anybody that records a lien against your property, they have a lien interest. So the first mortgage, right? And I did an example for you here, right? Let's say you have your first lien, that's a mortgage. Your second lien, let's say your second lien will typically be, position will be, let's say the association is owed money, right? The person may have a second mortgage. Then there also may be contractor liens. So the individual entity, right, that files a foreclosure action, they're going to usually name all the lien holders that are subordinate to them because they basically can wipe them out when the foreclosure sale happens. Why is this important? Because sometimes you may have a second mortgage, right? So number three files a foreclosure action. If they get a final judgment, they only have the right to wipe out the liens under them. So let's say liens 4 and 5 to make it easy. And the most common example that you'll see is sometimes the associations will foreclose because they want to remove the owner from title and take possession of the unit. And that doesn't mean that the first mortgage is wiped out. And this situation is pretty frequent where individuals bid at auction and they don't realize that they're bidding on a association lien and the property is still going to be subject to a first mortgage even after the foreclosure sale occurs. Another little pro tip when you're looking at these auctions and you're in there, right? Because this is a good source of inventory to understand, properties in our market that are there. And by the way, I'm doing this presentation because obviously most of you are in Miami-Dade, and but if you're actually logged into the website, if you see there on the bottom left where it says jump to and it says select website, you can jump to counties all throughout Florida that also use the same platform. So, if you're in Broward, you can do it. Palm Beach uses a different system, but there's several counties, there's numerous counties throughout Florida. The majority of them use this platform. So when you click on any one of these days, you'll get this list of properties. So a couple of things to look out for. Number one, given the fact that the amount of foreclosures has gone down significantly, they move a lot quicker. The courts have a lot less of a caseload. Not to mention the courts also have these days, they have a directive from the Supreme Court where effectively they're being told cases need to be resolved in 18 months and they initiated all sorts of new rules. That did not exist during the last cycle. So the reason I'm bringing it up right now is that you should see cases moving a lot faster. And when you see cases from 2007, be very wary of any individual that's been in foreclosure that long. They're probably putting up a hell of a fight and there's a reason and there's something going on. Um, and next, now that I've kind of given you all a very thorough explanation of foreclosures, is I wanted to explain how the short sale process works. And the short sale process is basically going to entail the individual reaching out to their lender and getting an application from them saying, hey, I owe you more than what it's worth. I'd like a short sale application. And they may or may not have it because obviously there is so many less short sales going on these days than there was back in 2010, 11, 12. But if you have an individual in this situation, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to get that application or find out what they want. The individual is going to have to compile all that information, provide it back to the lender, who will then review it all, right? Because they want to kind of view the financial picture, all right? Then the lender will, after they review it, they provide a response, and then the individual either accepts it, repeats the process and provides more information, or they may have to deal with other debtors because maybe they come to an agreement with the first mortgage, but they still need to get other parties to lower the amounts owed. So that's a quick guide on it. I don't want to go too deep on short sales because honestly, you don't see them as frequently anymore. My advice would be if you actually have someone in that position, ask anybody if they have a short sale processor. There's still some of them out there. There's individuals that were processing these and understand how to deal with banks, and they can help you through the process. Um, and finally, I think I've given you a lot of tips on how to deal with individuals in distress and foreclosure and what that process looks like. I also want to give you some advice on when you're dealing with individuals that buy, typically investors, right? Qualify them, take it from somebody, as you've seen that I've represented so many investors. People come to me all the time with, Jonathan, with your experience, I want you to help. And I need to qualify them just like I would qualify any buyer buying with a conventional loan. Because a lot of people will say, I'm an investor. And uh, we need to define that, right? And so make sure you're asking the right questions. So you may not be spinning your wheels with somebody who's, got a pipe dream of becoming, Grant Cardone. No offense to that, but all these courses that they pitch on trying to make everybody into, owning 500 doors and, and all these things has a lot of individuals kind of deluded about what they actually can do. So, ask them, how much capital do you have set aside? How much money do you really have right now to invest? And sometimes, most of the times, they won't have all the money. So ask them, who are your funding partners? Like, do you have a good DSCR lender? Do you got private money? Do you have, a capital partner that backs you, right? And on top of that, do you also even have contractors that can help? Um, Another thing too is ask them for their buy box. A good investor is going to tell you, listen, I like three twos that are at least 1,500 square feet with a garage built after 1980. And, I like the Kendall area. That to me tells me you're savvy and you know what you're doing. You want to know what freaks me out? When somebody comes, oh, no, I want to invest. Oh, I'll buy anything if it makes sense. Well, what's sense to you? What does a deal look like to you? How do you define a deal? Because for example, I have clients who are very good clients. They just want to make 15%, but they want houses that only need a little bit of work and that they can turn over the money twice in a year because in their head, that brings them closer to 30%. As opposed to people coming to me saying, I want to make 30% in 4 months. Like, we all want to do that. So, qualify them, ask questions, understand. And with that being said, I want to thank you all, but Kevin, I think we have 7 minutes. So if it's okay with you, I don't mind tackling
More than
some
okay.
of the questions.
Yeah, here, I'll go ahead and do it just so
Yeah, tell me the questions.
you focus on the questions. I'll focus on the questions, you focus on the answers, what I meant to say. Give me a sec. I went too high. All right, so for the people asking for the PDF, I will be with Jonathan's permission. I will be sharing this recording online. I can send everybody the recording. That way, not only do you get the PDF, but you get his excellent insight as well. So be on the lookout for that on our YouTube channel next week. And I will post what I'll do for you right now, if you give me a second, is I will even share with you the link to all of our 2025 classes. So give me 2 seconds. I'll post that in the chat.
So I'll tackle. So somebody asked, when can I check if the first mortgage is the cause of the foreclosure? So what you're going to want to do is partner up with somebody who's in title, so you can order a title search and have that reviewed. Because typically when you review the title, what ends up happening is the way title looks like when there's a search is it shows all the documents recorded against the property, and typically it's going to require either somebody in title or an attorney to review it all and kind of grab, the way I always like to describe it, it's almost like there's like six cards and they want to like put them in order, like who's in first position, who's in second, who's in third, etc. But typically you're gonna want to do that through a title search. Property taxes, those survive and will have to be paid because those run with the property.
All
Let
right,
me
here's the
keep
next
going.
question.
So
And I'm sure you answered this to some degree, so maybe an abridged format here, but how can you stop the foreclosure?
you can pay the bank. You can pay them what they're owed. That's one way. You can work out a resolution. You can try to achieve some sort of settlement. But usually it's going to be either paying them off, selling the property, or in the case where it's a non-payment default, in other words, there's something else leading to it, resolving that underlying issue, or they can reach out to the bank and maybe they come to some sort of modification agreement where the bank agrees to modify the terms of the bank agrees to modify the terms of the loan in order to get the person back on schedule. And usually the way that looks like is they'll usually do like a trial payment run where they will say, listen, this is the framework for a deal. If you pay X amount over the next 4 months and show you can make timely payments, we'll consider entering into a permanent modification.
Okay, next question. Can you help refinance debt? Is that also an option? Somebody's asking if they can help somebody refinance the debt that
Yeah, I mean, listen, if money's owed, and that's why I'm saying you need to have your funding partners is you're gonna you're gonna want to refer that individual. Maybe they're not ready yet to sell or they don't need to sell, you refer them to a lender, and typically what I will say is, obviously make sure you have an experienced lender lined up, preferably somebody that has like, bank statement, non-QM stuff, because typically what you're going to see is the individual who's ended up in foreclosure. There's probably some reason and they're going to need A conventional loan product is typically not going to work for them because a foreclosure creates a lot of issues. So they may need some sort of alternative loan. And it'll depend if it's owner occupied. So you definitely want to have a savvy lender that can explore options with them.
Good. Okay. Here's a commercial foreclosure question. If you buy a note on a commercial property to be foreclosed, does it mean that you own it when it is foreclosed, or can others pitch in and buy it too?
I assume what he means by others can pitch in and buy is that when the foreclosure sale happens, others can bid. So if you buy the note, it's the process is the same. You foreclose, you get a judgment. The judgment orders sale. So let's say it's a commercial note, and let's just stay with our same fact pattern. $1 million is owed. You, as the holder of the note, now the holder of the judgment, because gets the note ceases to exist and becomes a judgment, you have the ability to bid up to 1 million. So if the property is worth more than 1 million, there's a good chance you may have to put additional money and bid along with everybody else. So,
Okay. Next question. How many days after foreclosure is the auction forced?
so after the foreclosure action is filed by the bank, the foreclosure can take, Um, like I said, it could take anywhere from a year to plus. Typically, I mean, if they fast track it, they could get it done in 6 months, but it'll take some time. It's obviously going to depend on, does the individual contest it, raise defenses, or does it go uncontested? Because if the individual doesn't fight anything, the bank could probably, or whoever is foreclosing, could probably get it done in approximately 6 months. But if we're talking after the judgment is entered, usually the judgment is entered and the foreclosure sale will be usually minimum 30 days out.
Got it. Okay. You did mention that use the jump to feature if you're looking for stuff outside of Miami-Dade. And that's on that one page. You'll have to go back to this recording to see it. And then, are there cases where the bank forgives the outstanding balance after a foreclosure sale?
So that's I'm going to assume that question is stating, so let's say the property is worth 300K, the judgment was for 1 million, and the bank was only able to get 300K for the property, so there's still 700,000. That's typically called deficiency. And that will be up to the bank whether or not they want to go after that, what's known as deficiency judgment. I'll tell you, we used to not really see them, back in the foreclosure crisis days, because most of the banks would effectively write off the debt. But these days, uh, I would say you see them more. But obviously, every case is different, and it's up to, it's going to depend on how much of a deficiency. It's going to depend on the credit quality of the individual who went to foreclosure, right? Like, is that money collectible or not? But do they have the right to do it? Absolutely, they do. If they, in addition to the foreclosure, also filed an account for breach of contract to determine the amount of money due.
Okay, next question. Where can you check if the first mortgage is the cause of the foreclosure?
That's the title search. I answered that question.
Okay,
That you
got it.
do with the
Thank
title
you.
search.
And you already answered what about outstanding property taxes, correct?
Yep, yep. So,
Got it. Does a short sale offset a bankruptcy?
those are concurrent processes that can happen at the same time. So an individual can be, let's say a foreclosure is filed, the individual could be trying to do a short sale. But the important thing, and I think somebody may be asking that too, is just because you reach out to the bank to do a short sale does not mean that the foreclosure process is going to stop. And in fact, typically you will find a massive disconnect because what will happen is the asset managers for the lender are managing the short sale process. In other words, they're working out a workout with you, and the attorneys who have been told, grab this piece of paper and foreclose on it, are running. So don't let a homeowner assume, well, I'm talking to them and they're gonna work with me. Once it's in attorney's hands, remember, look, my personal opinion, and I come as an attorney, they're being given the instruction to get to the end. And what a lot of people, especially the individuals in foreclosure, don't seem to understand, it's you haven't paid, you haven't been paying, you forced them here, and now you're showing up when all of these steps have happened, and you're trying to say like, hey, 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 no, 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 I'm a nice guy, work with me. So is the bank incentivized to stop everything? No, they're going to keep going and hold your feet to the fire because at the end of the day, they're trying to, finalize and bring some resolution to this process. And the reality is, at the end of the day, and this is important for you all to understand is because I think there's some misconceptions in the market. People think that, and obviously it depends on the bank or the lender or who may actually be holding it, but the majority of the times, especially the big bank lenders, they they don't want to own properties. They don't want to do REOs. Trust me, during the downturn, they learned how bad they are at managing properties. They want money that they collect um, cash flow on every month through interest payments. They do not want to be doing this entire process because they're not good at it. They truly are not. You may find some specialty capital lenders that like to buy debt and do it, but for the most part, the big banks they're not great at it, and they just want to get their money performing so they can show a return to investors.
Nice. Okay, what platforms do you recommend as the best auction sites and foreclosure sites?
So I gave it to you all in the presentation. The Clerk of Court auctions, Miami-Dade Real Foreclose, in my opinion, is the best one because it's an actual true auction. When it's ordered, the sale will happen. It's per the court rules. There's no modification. My issue with all these other third-party platforms is they can make up whatever rules and the each even on the same site they can have different rules. And like for example, the one that annoys me all the time is they will say this is an auction, in other words, where we're going to bid up, but it's going to be subject to final asset manager review. So you could get to the end, be the winning bidder at $550,000, and then somebody from the bank would reach out and they'd be like, actually, on this file they're saying the minimum is 625. And you're sitting there saying, well, wait a second, like I just went to a marketplace where I competed with other bidders and I know the market's only willing to pay 550, but you got to play that game. And then you get into other things, which is there's, auctions that occur as a result of bankruptcies, and those can get complicated, especially if you're talking about like reorganization bankruptcies where the court may make up all sorts of crazy rules. And so, in my opinion, we've always focused on the court ones because we know the rules, and the rules are very set and they can't be manipulated. So let me just ask you the question, right? Because I haven't done one of these in a while. Like thumbs up, like did you all find this information helpful? Like, do you have a better understanding? Is it giving you more knowledge? And then also, what would be next, right? Like, what would you all like to learn a little bit more about? Because I'm happy to work with Kevin and make sure in our, maybe Kevin, we can have like a Seinfeld series, right? We do like a whole series on defaults and foreclosures.
As long as I get to play that bass sound at the beginning of every episode, I'm in.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered the majority of the questions, so um,
Yeah, we're good. There was one other question.
go ahead.
Is what platform do you use to look for liens and stuff like that?
That's an extremely generic question. I'm assuming trying to find individuals in default and whatnot. Um, I will tell you, you have two really good um, platforms through the association. You have Remine, which is one of them that allows you to do searches, and you also have IMAP. Those are two really good ones that you can go through there because, for example, in IMAP, it'll show you properties. When you click down, it'll show you if there's an action filed against a property and you can see a foreclosure. Like, honestly, even without even doing it, I always click on the IMAP for the property because I've been using IMAP for 12 years and I'm used to doing it. But even yesterday, we were about to put an offer on a property for a buyer. And in doing so, we clicked on it and we're like, oh, he's in foreclosure, which obviously now changes my dynamics because I'm like, all right, there's a little sense of urgency here. And that's obviously in negotiations, you want to have as much information as possible because information is leverage. So, um,
Yeah, there's also a website. I don't know how good it is, but it's called lienlibrary.com.
there's a bunch of them and there's a bunch of third-party sites. I will be very transparent. I tend to use, we have always only focused on what's going to auction. Um, and so we've always kind of been there. What I will tell you is you can use like even with some of the dialer programs, you can get information on the defaults and whatnot. My suggestion to you would be you're going to have to try out some of the different platforms. I don't want to endorse any specific one because we have used a bunch. The other issue that I will have, and I would like to educate you all so you are there. And this is why I'm saying you need to ask a lot of questions and you need to understand the process. Be also very careful because some of that data is stale. So it may be they will tell you like, oh, we'll give you 1,000 people in default. Well, a lot of those people may have already sold or they may have worked it out because people have equity. So it's not in 2010 when your property was worth 300 and you owed 1 million, you didn't care because your main priority was just to extend it as long as possible. Nowadays, where people lose equity every day, they stay in default or they're in foreclosure, they resolve it really quick. So you need to be careful too and make sure that it's a good data source because some of them they'll sell you stale data and now you're calling someone who is no longer in foreclosure and like I said, people who are in these situations are very um they don't like hearing about a bad situation that they were in, so sometimes be ready to get an earful. So
Yeah, I bet that's great advice to I think end on is when you approach these people, be very cautious. Yeah.
well, and that's why my advice is very simple. Just ask questions. You don't need to tell them what's going on. Ask them the questions. It's no different than any other seller or individual, right? Who's in control of the conversation? The person that is asking the questions. And a lot of times when you're asking the questions, you can get there. And the more you work through these scenarios, that's why if you get somebody who's in distress and you put them in front of me, I can turn them into a seller in 30 minutes because I will ask them enough questions of, well, how are you going to do it? Well, I'm going to pay them off. Well, okay, you're going to pay them off. Oh, you're going to modify the loan. Okay, but all right, but how's it going at work? Oh, you lost your job. Sorry to hear that. Oh, okay, so how are you going to show the bank that you have income to make the payments? And then they start going through, and then by the end of it, they're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to list the property with you. And you're like, huh, that's a great idea, you know? And but you need to ask the questions because they need to make that decision. And if you come in telling them to list, they don't want to hear that. That's not what they want. But if you act like a financial consultant and you're asking them all the right questions and you know what to ask and you know how the process plays out, you can get them there. Um, but yeah, Kevin, I think we're at 210. So I think what I'll do right now is I'm extremely impressed by Kevin's ability to promote me. I'm gonna hire him to do my birthday parties. 82 people for an hour and 10 minutes listening to me babble on about foreclosures and distressed property. So I really want to thank Kevin for putting this together. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. And on the screen, I put my Instagram, I put my cell phone number. I'm extremely accessible. I love putting deals together and helping people figure stuff out. So if you ever have one of these situations and you want to ask me a question, I'm more than happy, to answer your text and talk to you all. But Kevin, thank you so much for putting this together, and thank you all for tuning in today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you back on next year, man. We'll get that started soon. And thank you everybody for tuning in today. Next week we have at 1 p.m. Bridging the Gap with down payment assistance, and then lo siento para mi español, pero el clase a las 11 es multiplica tus ingresos vendiendo nuevos desarrollos. So we'll see you there on both of those classes next Wednesday. Take care, everybody. We'll see you.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm gonna be on my laptop.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I have a full purse.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm eating before I leave.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm sneaking out for showing.
We're YPN leaders.
Of course we're going to be creating content.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm signing up for classes.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm Cafecito obsessed.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm gonna crash the next happy hour.
If I'm on my way home, yeah. Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still amaze me? If I'm on my way home, yeah. Just